You know I have to do this, Sarah. My voice was steady, the kind I used to close a seven-figure deal over a shaky connection. The Porsche's engine hummed, a low purr that ate up the miles of asphalt separating New York from Montana. 10 years is enough time for a person to grow up, to figure things out. I owe him this, and honestly, I owe it to myself, too. The phone was silent for a beat, except for the faint static of 1,000 miles of bad reception. Sarah probably had her head in her hands. This isn't a hostile takeover, Amelia. It's a man, your ex-husband. You can't just fix him. It's a project, I said, more to myself than to her. A personal one. I ended the call. Talking about it made it feel fragile. Thinking about it, planning it, that was my strength. For the last 10 years, I'd built an empire on seeing a problem and executing a solution. And Jacob was the first problem I ever ran away from. The memory flickered behind my eyes, sharp and unwelcome like a shard of glass. That afternoon in the woods behind our house, the smell of pine and damp earth. One minute we were walking, his hand loosely in mine, and the next, he was just gone. Not a sound. He'd just vanished from the path. I'd called his name until my throat was raw. Hours later, when the sky was a deep, bruised purple, I found him, standing on the porch, just standing there. His clothes were clean, not a speck of mud, not a single twig in his hair. His eyes, that was the part that had burrowed into my brain. He'd looked at me, but it was like staring at an empty room through a window. He had a breakdown, I told myself then. A simple, terrifying psychological break. I was 29, ambitious, and scared shitless. I didn't know how to handle it. I saw a flaw, a weakness I couldn't schedule a meeting to resolve, and I bailed. Now, I was 40. Now, I understood. That wasn't a flaw. It was a cry for help, a cry I was finally ready to answer. The town of Harmony Creek appeared exactly as it had in my memory, which was the first unsettling thing. Nothing had changed, not a damn thing. The gas station sign was still missing the S, reading GA. Miller's General Store still had the same faded Coca-Cola sign in the window. It wasn't preserved, like some quaint tourist trap. It felt stopped, as if someone had hit pause a decade ago and forgotten to press play again. I pulled up to the old house, my house, and the engine's purr died, leaving a silence that pressed in on me. And there he was, Jacob. He was in the yard, splitting firewood. The axe rose and fell in a perfect, metronomic rhythm. Thwack. Pause. Rise. Thwack. He wore a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up over his forearms. He looked the same. Fuck, he hadn't aged a single day. Same strong jaw, same dark hair that fell over his forehead. Not a line on his face that wasn't there 10 years ago. A knot twisted in my stomach. People in the country age well, I told myself. Clean air, hard work. I got out of the car, the crunch of gravel under my heels feeling obscenely loud. Jacob? The axe stopped mid-swing. He turned his head slowly, deliberately. His eyes found me. And there it was again. That look. Not of surprise, or anger, or even recognition. It was the look of a camera lens focusing on something far, far away. Amelia, he said. His voice was flat, a statement of fact. Hi. I forced the smile so wide my cheeks ached. I'd walked a few steps closer, my arms half raising for a hug before I realized how stupid that was. They dropped to my sides. You look good. He just nodded, leaning the axe against the chopping block. He wiped his hands on his jeans, a pointless gesture since they were already clean. You're here. I'm here, I confirmed, my voice sounding ridiculously cheerful. Figured it was about time. The silence that followed was heavy enough to have its own gravity. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask me to come inside. He just stood there, watching me, waiting. I felt like a salesman on a cold call. That night I cooked. I made the beef stew he used to love, the scent filling the small kitchen that still held the ghost of our life together. I chattered nervously while I worked, talking about my company, about the city, about anything to fill the suffocating quiet. He sat at the table, watching my hands as I chopped carrots. When I served dinner, he picked up his spoon. He moved the chunks of meat and potato around his bowl. Pushed them from one side to the other. But he didn't eat, not a single bite. "It's not to your liking?" I asked, my fake cheer finally starting to crack. He looked up from the bowl, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second. "It's fine." He put the spoon down. He didn't touch it again. The next day, I drove into town, desperate for a normal human interaction. The woman at the general store, Mrs. Gable, beamed at me when I walked in. "Amelia, well, look at you, back from the big city." Her smile was enormous, a perfect crescent of white teeth. But it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were placid, like two blue marbles. "It's good to be back, Martha," I said, grabbing a basket, just picking up a few things. "How are you finding everything? Is Jacob taking good care of you?" she asked, her voice a sing-song. Before I could even form a reply, she had already turned away, humming as she restocked a shelf of canned beans. It was the same everywhere. People greeted me with a mechanical friendliness, wide smiles, dead eyes. They'd ask a question and walk away mid-answer. It was like they were all reading from a script. That's when I started noticing the symbols. They were scratched into things, a small one on the wooden post outside the store, another on the curb by the post office, a third etched into the peeling paint of a park bench. They were all the same design, a strange, jagged spiral, almost like a child's angry drawing of a sun. "It's just some weird local art project," I reasoned, paying for my groceries, "a town trying to be quirky." Every logical part of my brain, the part that ran a multi-million-dollar corporation, was working overtime to find explanations. Jacob has PTSD. The town is economically depressed, making everyone a bit strange. It's all explainable. It's all a problem that can be solved. But as I drove back to the house, I saw Jacob. He was standing at the edge of the woods, the very spot where he'd vanished all those years ago. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring into the trees. And I swear, for just a second, I thought I saw one of those same jagged spirals carved into the trunk of the old oak tree right beside him. A week. It had been a full week. 7 days of trying to chip away at the wall he'd built around himself, and all I had to show for it were bloody knuckles and a growing sense of dread. That's the only word for it. It was a low hum beneath the floorboards of my mind, getting louder every day. My initial optimism, the whole "I'm a new woman, I can fix this" bullshit, had evaporated in the thin Montana air. Fuck, I feel like I'm living with a stranger. No, worse. I was living with a ghost that had skin on. I started a notebook, a small black moleskin I'd brought from the city. I'm a CEO, for Christ's sake. I solve problems. I analyze data. I find patterns. I execute. So that's what I tried to do with Jacob. I labeled the first page, Behavioral Patterns and Potential Triggers. It felt clinical. It felt safe. The first entry was under a heading I called Nocturnal Activity. It started on the third night. I woke up around 3 in the morning, my mouth dry as dust. As I padded out of the bedroom, I saw him, a silhouette against the living room window, which was just a black square reflecting the room back at me. He was standing perfectly still, his back to me, staring out into the woods. "Jacob?" My voice was a croak. "You okay?" He didn't turn. For a second, I wasn't even sure he'd heard me. Then his voice came back, low and flat. "Listening." "Listening to what? The crickets?" I tried a weak laugh. He didn't answer. I stood there for what felt like an hour, my bare feet growing cold on the wood floor, until the weirdness of it just drove me back to bed. The next night, I woke up again. Same time, same silhouette, same window. He was a statue carved from shadows. This became the routine, every damn night. I'd wake up and he'd be there, listening, for what I had no idea. The next section in my notebook was dietary habits, or rather the lack of them. I knew he hadn't eaten the stew, but I tried to write it off. Maybe he just didn't like it anymore. But then I started watching, really watching. In the morning, he'd go through the motions. He'd put coffee grounds in the filter, pour the water, and let it brew. The smell would fill the house, a comforting, normal smell. He'd pour a cup, set it on the table. And then he'd just leave it there. He'd sit and stare at it until it was cold. One afternoon, I saw him take an apple from the bowl. He pulled out a pocket knife and peeled it in one long, perfect spiral of red skin. He set the peeled apple on a plate on the counter. By dinner time, it was still there. The white flesh turned a sickly mottled brown. He never took a single bite. He just prepared things. The final straw, the entry that made my hand shake as I wrote it, was yesterday. I called it Emotional Response Test. I was dusting the mantelpiece, trying to make this house feel less like a museum of my past failures, when my elbow knocked against his mother's old ceramic vase. It was an ugly thing, honestly, yellow with painted bluebirds, but it was the only thing of hers he'd kept. It hit the floor with a sickening shatter that seemed to echo in the house's oppressive silence. "Shit, Jacob, I'm so sorry." I dropped to my knees, the sharp edges of the ceramic threatening my fingers. My heart was pounding. I expected something, anger, a shout, at least a sad sigh. The real Jacob would have been heartbroken. He was sitting in his armchair by the cold fireplace, cleaning his old hunting rifle with an oily rag. He lifted his head. His eyes glanced at the mess on the floor, then at my face, then back to the rifle in his lap. He didn't say a word. He just kept polishing the barrel in slow, methodical circles. No anger, no sadness, nothing. It was like I'd just dropped a napkin. The absolute zero of his reaction was colder than any rage could have been. My project was failing. My data points weren't adding up to PTSD. They were adding up to something else, something I didn't have a name for. The town wasn't helping. That first-day friendliness had curdled. Now, when I went to the store, people still smiled, but they looked at me differently. Their eyes would flick from my face, to my car, to the road leading back to Jacob's house. There was a pity in their gaze that made my skin crawl. Yesterday, at the town's only laundromat, old Mrs. Henderson, a woman with hands gnarled like oak roots, grabbed my arm as I was loading my clothes. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She leaned in, her breath smelling of mothballs and coffee. "You stop trying to wake a sleeping man, you hear?" she whispered, her eyes wide and urgent. Before I could even ask what the hell she meant, she let go and scurried away, leaving me standing there with a basket of dirty laundry and a new layer of ice in my veins. Then came the symbol on my car. I saw it this morning when I went to drive to the next town over, just for a change of scenery, just to feel normal for an hour. There, etched into the glossy black paint of the Porsche's driver's side door, was that same jagged spiral. It wasn't drawn on, it was carved in, deep, with something sharp. The metal underneath gleamed. This wasn't art. This wasn't a town trying to be quirky. This was a message, a warning. That was it. That was the end of the line for my rationalizations. I drove back to the house, my mind racing. Jacob was gone, probably standing at the edge of the woods again, staring at God knows what. I parked the car, the ugly scratch feeling like a scar on my own skin. My eyes landed on the old shed out back, a place he'd told me not to go into. "Just old tools and junk," he'd said, his voice as empty as ever. "The lock is rusted shut anyway." The lock wasn't rusted shut. It was just a heavy, old-fashioned padlock. I found a crowbar in the woodshed. My hands were shaking, but I didn't care. The CEO was gone. The problem solver was gone. All that was left was a woman who had a terrible feeling that she'd made a mistake coming back here, a fatal one. The lock groaned and then snapped with a loud crack. The door creaked open. The smell hit me first. Dry rot, dust, and something else. Something vaguely metallic and old, like dried blood. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the dim light filtering through a single dirty window. And then I saw them. The symbols. They were everywhere, carved into the wooden walls from floor to ceiling, painted on the floor in what looked like rust or maybe paint, scratched into every single tool handle, every old can, every piece of forgotten junk. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. A frantic, obsessive wallpaper of madness. My breath hitched in my throat. I took a step back, my heel bumping into something. I turned. And in the center of it all, propped up on a broken chair, was a figure, a man-shaped thing, made of twisted branches and bound with twine. It was a crude, horrifying effigy, a scarecrow meant for something other than crows. It was wearing... Oh God, it was wearing his old denim jacket, the one he'd worn that day 10 years ago. And pinned to its chest, right where a heart would be, was a faded photograph of me. I didn't scream. I didn't even gasp. I just stood there, staring at my own smiling face pinned to the chest of that thing made of sticks and his old jacket. My brain just stopped. It was like a circuit breaker flipped, plunging everything into a silent, buzzing darkness. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light to seem like the only things moving in the entire world. Then the breaker flipped back on. Get out. The thought wasn't mine. It felt like it was injected directly into my brainstem, an instinct older than language. I backed away, my hand fumbling behind me for the door. I didn't turn around. I couldn't take my eyes off the picture. Me, 10 years younger, laughing into the camera on a summer day that felt like a lifetime ago, a life that belonged to someone else. My hand found the splintery wood of the door. I pulled it shut, the latch clicking with a sound that seemed to echo across the whole damn skate. I didn't run. I walked. A very deliberate, very controlled walk back to the house. Each step was a negotiation with my own legs. Just to the porch. Now to the door. Good. Now inside. He was in the kitchen, wiping down the already spotless counter with a damp rag. He looked up when I came in. His eyes, the same blue as I remembered, held nothing. They were just optics, lenses taking in data. I need to go into town, I said. The words came out sounding surprisingly normal. My voice was a stranger, but a capable one. The next town over. Need to pick up some specific things for dinner. Liar. He just nodded. One slow, deliberate nod. Then he went back to wiping the counter. He didn't ask what things. He didn't ask which town. He didn't care. The keys to the porch were in the bowl by the door. My hand was shaking so badly I had to brace it with my other one just to pick them up. I could feel his stillness behind me, a physical pressure on the back of my neck. I didn't look back as I walked out the door. I got into the car, the etched symbol on the door a gaping wound in the black paint. I started the engine, the roar of it a beautiful, violent sound in the crushing quiet. I pulled out of the driveway, gravel spitting from under the tires, and I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I was a mile down the road. The house was gone. Just trees. Freedom. The feeling was so intense it was almost painful. It was like coming up for air after being held underwater for a week. I rolled down all the windows, letting the cold Montana air whip through the car, stinging my cheeks. I turned the stereo on, blasting some indie rock station from a city 100 miles away. The music was loud and messy and alive. I drove. I just drove. For the first time in 7 days, I wasn't analyzing. I wasn't making lists in my Moleskine. I was just moving. The sun felt warm on my arm. The world outside Jacob's property line was normal. People in pickup trucks waved as they passed. Cows chewed grass in green fields. It was all so fucking ordinary, it made the last week feel like a fever dream. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I'd imagined the shed. Maybe I was the one having the breakdown. Yeah, that had to be it. I was stressed. A high-powered CEO trying to reconcile with a traumatized ex-husband in the middle of nowhere. Of course I was seeing things. Of course I was getting paranoid. The effigy was just some weird small-town prank. The symbols were local folklore. Jacob was just a man buried under a mountain of pain. I could still fix this. I could. An hour later, I pulled into a town called Flat Creek. It was bigger, less curated than the one near the house. It had a main street with a movie theater and 3 different coffee shops. It had traffic lights. I felt my shoulders unclench for the first time in what felt like a decade. I saw a diner on a corner, a classic-looking place with a neon sign that just said, "Eat." It looked perfect. It looked real. I parked and went inside. The place smelled of coffee and frying bacon and bleach. It was the most beautiful smell in the world. I slid onto a stool at the counter. A few old guys in baseball caps were talking about fishing at a corner booth. A waitress was refilling sugar dispensers. It was a pocket of sanity. "Coffee, hon?" The man behind the counter was in his late 60s, with a kind, craggy face and a white apron tied around his thick middle. "Yes, please, black." He poured a cup from a glass pot and set it down in front of me. "You're not from around here." It wasn't a question. I managed a small smile. "Is it that obvious?" "The Porsche helps," he said with a chuckle. He started wiping down the counter with a clean rag. "Passing through?" "Something like that." I took a sip of the coffee. It was hot and bitter and wonderful. I needed to talk. I needed to say something normal to a normal person, just to prove to myself that I still could. "I'm staying out near Brighton, with an old friend, Jacob Thorne." The man stopped wiping. He didn't look up, but his hands went still on the countertop. "Trying to knock some sense into him?" I continued, forcing a light, exasperated laugh. It sounded brittle even to my own ears. "You know, he had this incident about 10 years ago. Got lost in the woods behind his house for a few hours. He was never quite the same after. Still think he's suffering from some kind of shock. Stubborn man, won't talk about it." The bartender, slowly, deliberately, placed his rag on the counter. He picked up a clean glass and began polishing it, his movements measured. He looked at me then. His eyes weren't unkind. They were just tired, like he'd had this conversation before. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but clear over the clatter of the diner, "I used to be the sheriff for this whole county, Brighton included." He set the polished glass down. The small sound it made on the Formica counter was like a gunshot. He looked me straight in the eye. "You must be mistaken. Poor Jacob Thorne went missing in those woods 10 years ago. We searched for a week. Dogs, helicopters, the whole 9 yards. Never found a trace of him." My breath caught in my throat. My hand, the one holding the coffee cup, began to tremble. He leaned a little closer, his voice dropping even lower. A calm, factual statement that cut through the air and filleted my entire reality. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers. It didn't shatter. It was a thick, heavy mug, and it hit the counter with a dull, heavy thud. Hot coffee sloshed over my hand, over my jeans, but I didn't feel the burn. I couldn't feel anything. The sounds of the diner, the talking, the clinking silverware, the sizzle from the grill, all faded away into a dull, distant roar, like the ocean heard through a seashell. My world narrowed to the old sheriff's face. And then, the images came. Not one by one, all at once. A violent, chaotic slideshow projected onto the back of my eyelids. Jacob, standing at the window at 3 a.m., listening. The apple, peeled perfectly, rotting on the counter, untouched. His complete lack of reaction when the vase shattered. Nothing. A void. Old Mrs. Henderson's iron grip on my arm. You stop trying to wake a sleeping man. The townspeople's eyes. Not friendly, not welcoming, pitying, afraid. The symbols, carved into the trees, scratched into my car, a wallpaper of madness covering the walls of the shed. And the effigy. The stick man wearing his jacket with my own smiling face pinned to its heart. My mind, the sharp, analytical CEO mind that prided itself on data and patterns, finally put it all together. Every piece I had tried so hard to rationalize, to label as trauma or PTSD, clicked into place, forming a picture so monstrous, so impossible, that my sanity fractured. I had spent a week in a house with a thing that wore my husband's face. I had slept under its roof. I had cooked for it. I had tried to talk to it, to heal it, to love it. I had been trying to fix a ghost, and the whole time the ghost was me. I was the only human thing in that house. My mouth opened. No sound came out. My vision swam, the sheriff's face blurring into the background.
The last thing I saw before the darkness took over was my own reflection in the polished chrome of the napkin dispenser. A woman's face, pale and frozen, her eyes wide with a terror that had no name. If that wasn't Jacob, then what was it?